In this book, you will learn how to reconnect with the vision you've always carried inside you, no matter where life has taken you. Through real stories of people who dared to begin again, you'll discover the courage to reclaim your purpose and create the life you were meant to live. This isn't just about inspiration, it's about taking action and transforming your reality. Get ready to step into the life you were always meant to create. The Vision Within. Introduction. The vision you've always carried. You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet tug deep inside you, as if something bigger is calling your name. Something more than the daily grind, more than the roles you play or the life you've built. It doesn't always make sense, this feeling. Sometimes it's a whisper, barely audible through the noise of your busy days. Other times it's a sharp reminder, a longing that surfaces when you're alone at night, wondering if this is all there is. We've all had that moment, when we realize we've been living for everyone else's expectations, chasing someone else's version of success. It's easy to forget what you truly want, buried beneath the weight of obligations and fears. But deep down, the vision you've always carried has never gone away. It's just waiting for you to listen. This book isn't about giving you a new dream. It's about helping you reconnect with the one that's been there all along. It's about uncovering the strength to start over, the courage to believe in yourself again, and the wisdom to trust the journey ahead. In these pages, you'll meet people like you, individuals who faced loss, fear, and uncertainty but chose to rebuild, to begin again. You'll see how they found the courage to reconnect with their inner vision, despite the odds. Because here's the thing, the vision within you is not some far-off fantasy. It's a truth waiting to be realized. You already have everything. You need to make it real. The road won't always be easy. But when you choose to listen to the vision within, you begin to move with purpose. You step into the life you were always meant to live, with the power to create it on your own terms. Are you ready to remember what you've always known? Are you ready to begin again? Chapter 1. The Thing You Almost Forgot. Maya stood on Cannon Beach, Oregon, the cold wind slicing through her thin jacket. Her bare feet sank into the wet sand, and the icy waves nipped at her toes. It was mid-October, and the Pacific was steel, gray, restless under a heavy sky. She hadn't planned to end up here. 3 months earlier, Maya had been racing through the streets of downtown Chicago, a rising star at her marketing firm, the kind of person everyone assumed had it all figured out. Her days blurred into deadlines and late-night emails, power lunches and glass-walled meetings where she pitched ideas with polished charm. But at night, alone in her apartment, Maya lay wide-eyed in bed, her chest tight with a quiet panic she couldn't name. When her father died of a heart attack that spring, Maya didn't grieve right away. She worked harder. She threw herself into meetings, projects, promotions. She told herself she was fine. Until one morning, standing in the shower, she broke. Water streamed over her face, and without warning, the sobs came. Deep, heaving, unstoppable. 2 weeks later, she quit her job. She packed a bag, booked a flight west, and ran. Now, standing at the edge of the continent, Maya stared into the vastness. Her hands trembled in her pockets. She felt exposed, like the ocean could see every choice she had made, every part of herself she had abandoned. For the first time in years, she let herself whisper the words she had buried. This isn't the life I wanted. The realization hit her with raw force. She had spent years following someone else's map, chasing promotions, approval, safety. But the vision she had as a young woman, to write, to travel, to live deeply connected, hadn't died. It had waited. Quietly, stubbornly, it had waited. That night Maya sat in a small cabin overlooking the beach. She pulled out an old journal she hadn't touched in years and wrote 3 questions at the top of the page. What did I love before the world told me who to be? What keeps calling me when I'm quiet? What would I do if I weren't afraid? Her pen hovered, then moved. Words poured out. Messy, honest, imperfect. But they were hers, and that's when she felt it. Not clarity, not certainty, but something better, aliveness. Reality bends when belief begins. When Maya let herself believe her life could be different, something inside shifted. She didn't have all the answers, but belief cracked the door open. And that's where transformation always starts, in the moment you remember what you almost forgot. Practice for today. Find 10 minutes tonight. Ask yourself Maya's 3 questions. Don't edit. Don't judge. Just write. Let belief begin to stir. Chapter 2. More than your mistakes. Chris stood on the cracked porch of his childhood home in Dayton, Ohio, his rough hands shaking as he unlocked the front door. Inside, the walls smelled of old wood and regret. Chris hadn't been back here in 5 years. Not since the night he staggered out drunk, shouting at his mother, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and empty bottles. Now, freshly out of rehab, he was here with one goal: make amends and rebuild. Chris had been a carpenter. Before addiction took over, he used to say working with wood was like working with life. You had to measure twice, cut once, and know how to repair what you'd split. But when his father died, grief hollowed him out, and alcohol filled the space. Over time, the bottles replaced the blueprints and the wreckage piled up. Lost jobs, lost trust, lost self-respect. Standing in that house, Chris knew something deep in his bones. He couldn't fix the past. But maybe, just maybe, he could build something new. We all carry moments we wish we could undo. Words we regret, people we hurt, promises we broke. But here's the truth most of us miss. Forgiveness isn't the end of the road, it's the gateway to purpose. Chris thought forgiveness was about saying sorry and hoping people forgot. What he learned was far more powerful. Forgiveness is about reclaiming your own worth so you can show up for others with something real to give. He started small. He fixed the steps on his mother's porch. He repaired the broken kitchen cabinet. Every nail he hammered in reminded him, I am more than my mistakes. And when his mother came out one morning, wrapped in her robe, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and said, It's good to have you home, son, something shifted in Chris. He realized, redemption doesn't erase the past. It builds on it. Reality bends when belief begins. Chris's belief that he could change didn't erase his record or undo the hurt, but it opened the door to a life where his scars had meaning. He started volunteering at a local recovery center, teaching other men how to work with their hands. Slowly, the man who once tore things apart became the man who built things back together, not just furniture, but lives. Practice for today. Write a letter of forgiveness to yourself. You don't have to send it. Just write it. Acknowledge what you've done, own it without excuses, and then tell yourself the truth. I am more than my mistakes. Let that be your starting point, not your ending. Chapter 3. When the storm wakes you up. The night Hurricane Katrina tore through New Orleans, Jasmine sat on the rooftop of her grandmother's house, knees hugged to her chest. watching everything she knew go underwater. She was 22, a college dropout working part-time at a diner and crashing at her grandmother's between couch surfing stints. Life had been on autopilot. Wake, work, party, sleep, repeat. She never thought about the future. She barely thought about tomorrow. As the floodwaters rose, something inside Jasmine shifted. She watched neighbors pull each other onto rooftops, strangers form human chains, and people with nothing offer each other everything. By dawn, the storm had stripped away her apartment, her job, her car. Yet as the sun broke through the clouds, she felt something she hadn't known in years. Clarity. When all the noise was gone, she finally heard what mattered. In the months after Katrina, Jasmine helped gut houses and serve food at church kitchens. She slept on friends' floors. For the first time, she showed up not out of obligation, but because her heart told her, "This is who I am." What surprised her most wasn't the devastation. It was how alive she felt when everything superficial was gone. We live in a world obsessed with comfort and control. We insulate ourselves with routines, possessions, and expectations until life feels safe but numb. And then sometimes a storm comes. Not always a literal one, but a divorce, a diagnosis, a layoff, a loss. And it rips away the scaffolding. We're left raw, exposed, scared, but also awake. The vision within you waits for a crack in the shell you've built around your life. It doesn't need your perfection. It needs your openness. Jasmine rebuilt her life with intention. She went back to school, studying social work. She started a nonprofit helping displaced families find housing. 10 years later, when asked what Katrina took from her, she smiled softly and said, "It took my distractions, and it gave me myself." Reality bends when belief begins. When Jasmine stopped seeing herself as a victim of disaster and started seeing herself as someone with purpose, her life transformed. She didn't wait for permission. She stepped into the life that had been calling her all along. Practice for today. Ask yourself, what storm have I survived? Write down one way it woke you up to what matters. Then ask, what's one small action I can take today to honor that lesson? Maybe it's calling someone you love. Maybe it's letting go of an old resentment. Maybe it's signing up for that class you keep pushing off. Don't wait for life to push you. Lean in now. Chapter 4. The Day You Stop Performing. Eli sat in his sleek New York City apartment, the skyline outside glowing with promise and ambition. His phone buzzed on the glass coffee table, a constant reminder of the demands that ruled his life. 3 years ago, he had made his first million on Wall Street. At 29, he was on top of the world, successful, admired, and locked in a daily routine that gave him the illusion of control. But when the adrenaline wore off, all he could hear in the quiet moments was an empty echo. Eli had a routine: wake up at 5 a.m., work out, check emails, attend back-to-back meetings, and then crash into bed only to repeat it all the next day. He had the suits, the luxury cars, the designer watches, and the high-rise apartment. On the outside, it looked perfect. On the inside, he felt like a ghost. A week before his 32nd birthday, Eli stood at the edge of his penthouse terrace, looking down at the city that had given him everything, but also taken so much. The view was breathtaking, the lights flickering like 1,000 promises. But the truth gnawed at him. He was living someone else's life. When his phone buzzed with yet another urgent work request, something inside him snapped. For the first time in years, he put the phone down and didn't look back. Reality bends when belief begins. It was in the midst of that decision, stepping away from the life he thought was everything, that Eli started to see the world around him with fresh eyes. He didn't know it then, but that was the moment when everything began to change. The next few months were a blur of unfamiliarity. He sold his apartment, left his job, and took a road trip across the country, something he'd always wanted to do but had never allowed himself. He spent days in small towns, meeting people whose names he'd never heard of, talking about things he'd never had time for. One afternoon in a diner in New Mexico, he sat with a group of locals, old men playing cards, a young waitress with big dreams, and a retired teacher who'd left the city for peace. He realized that they all had one thing in common. They didn't need to perform for anyone. They weren't chasing something to prove their worth. They just were. And it hit him. Authenticity was the real currency, not achievement. Eli came back to New York a changed man. No longer driven by the need for approval, he sought out what truly mattered: real relationships, purpose-driven work, and a life that felt true to who he was. The more he let go of the idea of success, the more his life began to fall into place. He didn't stop working. In fact, he built a company that focused on creating educational resources for low-income students, something that had been a passion of his since he was a teenager. But now, it wasn't about the paycheck or the title. It was about the impact. Practice for today. Take 10 minutes today to list the performances you're putting on in your life. What are you doing just to impress others? What would it look like to stop and do things that feel authentically you, even if they don't fit the mold? Chapter 5. Love is a kind of vision. Sophia stood outside the hospital at sunrise, her scrub still pressed from a long night shift. She had just finished a 12-hour shift, but the weight in her chest wasn't from exhaustion. It was from the silent ache of her heart. Just a few months ago, Sophia's life had looked so different. She had been engaged to Jason, a man she had thought was her forever. They had dreams, a house in the suburbs, vacations in Italy, kids with their eyes, full of curiosity. But love, as it turns out, isn't something you can control. Jason had walked away, leaving Sophia in a quiet apartment with nothing but empty promises and a ring that still felt too heavy to remove. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. A text from her best friend, Rachel. "You okay? You haven't been yourself lately." Sophia typed a quick reply, then locked her phone, staring at the Texas sky above her. The world felt so loud, so relentless, and yet in this moment she was alone with herself. It was in the silence that something stirred within her, a whisper that had been building, slowly, since Jason left. Love isn't just about another person. Love is the fire within. She hadn't realized it until now, but Sophia had been pouring all of her love into the wrong places. She had given everything to Jason, to the dream of them, until she was empty. She'd spent her life thinking that love was something you could lose or find in someone else. But now, in the quiet of the early morning, she understood the truth. Love is the fuel for everything. Sophia's revelation didn't come with a light bulb moment or a grand gesture. It came softly, in the space between heartache and hope. It came in the form of her patients, whose faces she would see the next day in the ER. They needed her. Their stories, the ones they shared in moments of fear and pain, started to fill her up in a way nothing else could. It was in those moments, between treatments and comforting words, that Sophia realized what she had been missing all along. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a healer. And love, the love that flowed through her to every person she touched, was her purpose. Reality bends when belief begins. When you believe that love is more than just an emotion, when you see it as a driving force, a vision in action, your entire world changes. You stop waiting for love to come to you and you start using it to transform the world around you. Sophia was no longer waiting to be fixed by another person. She was letting love, her love for others, for life, transform her into the person she had always been meant to be. She was beginning to see her heartbreak as a bridge, not a dead end. Practice for today. Think about the last time you felt love. Was it a moment with a friend, a family member, or a stranger? How did it make you feel? Write down one way you can channel that love into your daily life today, not as a feeling but as a force for change. Chapter 6. Listening Beyond the Noise. Daniel sat in his car on the side of a dusty California road, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the empty horizon. The city of Los Angeles shimmered in the distance, but to Daniel it felt a million miles away. He had everything he'd ever dreamed of. A platinum record, sold-out concerts, fans screaming his name. And yet, here he was, wondering how he had become so lost. 2 years ago, the world was his. Music filled every inch of his life. His songs played everywhere, on the radio, in the clubs, during commercials. But as the fame and the lights grew, so did the exhaustion, the pressure, and the feeling of being hollow inside. He hadn't written a single song in months. The words that once flowed effortlessly now felt like distant echoes. The final straw came one night during a sold-out show in New York. As Daniel stood on stage, his guitar in hand, staring out at the crowd, he felt a strange emptiness. The cheers of thousands of fans didn't fill him. They didn't even reach him. His mind wandered far away from the spotlight to a place where he could breathe again. That night he walked off stage in the middle of the set. The next day, Daniel turned off his phone. No calls, no emails, no social media. He didn't know it at the time, but that single decision, to silence the noise, was the beginning of the journey back to himself. A week later, Daniel found himself in the middle of nowhere, sitting in the warmth of a tiny cabin with nothing but a guitar and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. It was here in the silence that he began to reconnect with the creative fire he had nearly forgotten. The first song he wrote was a raw reflection of everything he'd been holding inside. The lyrics poured out in a way they hadn't in years, not for the charts, not for the fans, but for himself. It was as though the real music had been buried beneath the demands of success, waiting to be remembered. Every day he'd sit on the porch watching the sunset, letting the quiet speak. To him, it wasn't just about music anymore. It was about rediscovering the part of himself that had been drowned out by the constant noise of other people's expectations. Reality bends when belief begins. In those quiet moments, Daniel realized that true creativity, the kind that moves people, the kind that feels alive, could never come from chasing fame or approval. It had always come from within. The vision was never lost. It had only been drowned by the noise of everything else. Practice for today. Find a moment of silence. Turn off your phone, close the laptop, and sit still for 5 minutes. Ask yourself, what have I been drowning out? Then listen. Let whatever comes to the surface guide you. Chapter 7. Small Steps, Big Shifts. Lena stood in the kitchen, the same place she'd stood every morning for the past 8 years. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house, except for the soft shuffle of her son's feet as he grabbed his cereal, She had spent years making sure everything was fine. Her job as a receptionist paid the bills, and her son Luke was healthy. She kept the house tidy, cooked meals, and smiled through the daily grind. But every morning, as she packed his lunch and kissed him goodbye, the thought was always there: this isn't the life I was meant to live. For Lena, the dream was simple but daunting. She wanted to go back to school. She wanted to become a teacher, to inspire kids like Luke who had trouble reading. But between work and being a single mom, she could barely find time to think, let alone figure out how to afford tuition. One Thursday evening, after a long day, at work she saw an ad for an online course in education. It was only $100 to get started. That night, as she sat on the edge of her bed, Lena felt the weight of the decision. She'd never taken risks. She was careful, safe. But the thought of continuing to live her life as is, without ever making the change, felt even heavier. She stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over the enroll button. The fear of failure, of not being able to keep up of what people might think. It all rushed in. And then, in a quiet, almost imperceptible moment, something shifted inside her. She tapped the button. The next morning, the sun had barely risen, but Lena felt lighter. The decision didn't fix everything, but it was a start. A small, terrifying, but powerful first step toward her bigger vision. In life, the big shifts don't always come from giant leaps. Often, they come from tiny moments of courage. The key is that small steps are not small at all. Lena's decision wasn't just about enrolling in a course. It was about saying, I believe in a future where I am more than just surviving. It was about committing to something that scared her, something that stretched her, but something that ultimately reshaped her entire future. The truth is, every big change begins with a single step, but so many of us hold back, waiting for a perfect moment, the right timing, the ideal circumstances. What we fail to realize is that waiting is its own form of resistance. We wait for permission for things to fall into place, but the reality is we're the ones who must create the shift. Lena was scared, but she trusted that small step more than she trusted the fear. And in doing so, she unlocked the possibility of a whole new world. Reality bends when belief begins. When you take one small step toward your vision, no matter how scary, you begin to bend reality toward you. The world starts to respond. Doors open, people appear, opportunities arise. But the first shift happens inside you. When you believe you can take that step, the universe has no choice but to align itself with your belief. Practice for today. Think about one small step you've been putting off. A phone call, a decision, a new habit. Commit to taking that step today, no matter how small. Don't worry about the big picture, just make the first move. Chapter 8. The Gift Inside Your Pain. Marcus sat in his old pickup truck, the engine idling, the air thick with the Georgia heat. The street outside was quiet, and the world seemed distant, like it belonged to someone else. He had been back from Iraq for 5 years, but the war never really left him. He could still hear the gunfire, still feel the ground shake under the weight of explosions, still smell the dust and sweat of those endless days. It wasn't just the nightmares. The flashbacks came at the strangest moments. At the grocery store while driving, or when someone mentioned a word that triggered his mind. Some days it was so overwhelming that he couldn't get out of bed. The hardest part wasn't the PTSD, though. It was the silence. He'd told his family he was fine. He'd told his friends he was fine. But Marcus wasn't fine. And no one knew what to say. He'd tried everything: therapy, medications, drinking. But nothing seemed to help. Not until the day he met Walter, a man he'd never planned to meet. It was a sunny afternoon. The kind of perfect Georgia day that makes you forget. You live in the South. Marcus was walking into the VA office for another session, dragging his feet and feeling like it wouldn't make a difference. He hadn't even made it past the door when he saw Walter. Walter was sitting alone on a bench, an older man with a slow smile and eyes that spoke of years lived and losses suffered. He didn't look like a therapist or a doctor. He just looked human. Marcus sat down beside him. "I see it," Walter said softly, without turning his head. "The weight you're carrying, I used to carry it too." Marcus froze. "What do you mean?" Walter turned to him slowly. "I mean, I've been where you are, and the pain you feel, it's not your enemy. It's the doorway to something you don't yet understand." That was the beginning. Walter didn't tell Marcus to get over his pain or ignore it. Instead, he taught him to embrace it. He said the deepest wounds often hold the key to healing, both for ourselves and for others. For months, they talked. Walter shared his own struggles, losing a son in Vietnam, battling his own demons, and finding purpose in helping others. Slowly, Marcus began to see his pain differently, not as something that had broken him, but as something that had shaped him, something that could now connect him to others who felt the same way. The first time Marcus helped another vet, he felt a shift in his soul. The words came naturally, like he had been preparing for this his whole life, even if he didn't know it. He wasn't healed, but he didn't need to be. He just needed to help. And in that process, something beautiful happened. His own pain became the bridge to healing for someone else. Reality bends when belief begins. When you start to believe that your pain isn't something to bury but something to use, you unlock the power to heal. Sometimes the wounds we carry are not just for us. They are meant to guide others. Practice for today. Take a moment to reflect on a struggle you've faced. Whether recent or from the past, how could it be used to help someone else? You don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes simply sharing your experience is enough to create a connection that can heal both you and others. Chapter 9. Seeing What's Already There. Olivia stood on the edge of the wide Montana ranch, the sun dipping low behind the mountains. She'd spent her whole life here, surrounded by acres of land, miles of open sky, and the steady rhythm of the seasons. But for years it had all felt ordinary. She'd been raised to work hard, to focus on what needed to be done and to never look back or question it. The cows needed feeding, the fences needed mending. There was always something, always a list, of things that kept her busy but never content. In her mind, this was simply life. Nothing spectacular, just a routine, a never-ending cycle of chores and responsibilities. It wasn't until last fall, during harvest season, that the shift began. Olivia had stayed out too long after dark checking the fields when her father's old truck pulled up beside her. His voice, rough from years of hard work, cut through the silence. "You ever stop to look around, Olivia?" She'd smiled, thinking he was making a joke, but he wasn't laughing. "Look at what?" she asked, still focused on the task at hand. "Look at everything you've got," he said, his gaze sweeping over the land. "You've got soil that grows more than just crops. You've got animals that trust you. You've got a house that's stood here through storms. And you've got this sky that makes you feel small in a good way." He let the words settle before adding quietly, "Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop running and see what's already right in front of you." In that moment, something shifted in Olivia's chest. Her father's words were simple, but the weight of them lingered. She'd been so caught up in what she didn't have or what she needed to fix that she couldn't see the beauty of what was already hers. The next morning, she stood outside at dawn, coffee in hand, as the sun broke across the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange. She let herself pause, breathe, and really look. The fields were quiet, the air was crisp, and the land, her land, was alive in a way she hadn't allowed herself to notice. She realized that the life she thought was ordinary was extraordinary, not because of some dramatic change, but because of the gratitude she had yet to fully embrace. Reality bends when belief begins. When Olivia began to appreciate what she already had, her perspective shifted. No longer was she racing toward an imaginary future, thinking she'd only find happiness there. Instead, she started seeing the beauty of the everyday. The rhythm of life on the ranch was no longer a burden, but a gift. And with that shift, everything changed. Gratitude didn't need to be a grand gesture. It didn't require a moment of epiphany. It was as simple as seeing what was already there. Practice for today. Take a walk through your day. Stop wherever you are, wherever you find yourself in the routine. Look around and see what's right in front of you. List 5 things you've taken for granted, and let the gratitude for them fill you up. The smallest moments are often the most profound. Chapter 10. When Belief Becomes Reality. Noah sat on the dusty porch of his modest home in Tucson, Arizona, watching the sun dip low behind the mountains. It was a view he'd known his whole life. A view that had been a reminder of everything he hadn't accomplished. Growing up, Noah was a high school dropout, a label that followed him like a shadow. His peers had moved on to college, starting careers or building families, while he drifted through various odd jobs, barely scraping. He'd spent years carrying the weight of failure on his shoulders, convinced that his lack of education would keep him stuck forever. Then, one day, as he sat at the local coffee shop, something shifted. He overheard a conversation between 2 young women, both working to improve their community. They talked about the struggles of local youth, how so many of them felt lost and disconnected, just like he once had. It was in that moment that Noah's vision, long buried beneath layers of doubt, came rushing to the surface. I could help them, he thought. I could give them a place to go, a place where they don't feel like they're stuck. The idea was simple: a community center, a safe space for teenagers to learn, create, and grow, a place where they could find the guidance Noah never had. But there was one problem. Noah had no formal education, no business experience, and at that moment, no money to make this dream a reality. But here's the thing. Belief is the first step to creation. Noah had spent years doubting himself, convinced that because he didn't have a college degree, he wasn't capable of doing something big. But in that moment, he realized something profound. Belief doesn't need a degree. It needs action. It needs vision. It needs courage. Noah took that first step without knowing exactly how things would play out. He began talking to local business owners, asking for advice, sharing his idea. Some laughed, some were skeptical, but a few saw his passion and offered to help. Noah had to learn on the fly: how to write a business plan, how to apply for grants, how to manage a project with little to no experience. But he kept going. Day after day, he worked. Late nights, long weekends, countless phone calls. He didn't stop. And then, a miracle happened. A local foundation heard his story and agreed to fund the center. The grand opening came a year later, and as Noah cut the ribbon, surrounded by the community he'd fought for, he realized one thing: belief, paired with relentless action, creates change. Reality bends when belief begins. Noah's journey proved that when you take the first step, the universe starts to meet you halfway. The world doesn't need you to have all the answers. It just needs you to take the leap and trust that everything you need will come into place. Noah's Center is now a thriving hub for local teens, offering mentorship, after-school programs, and a safe space where young people can see the possibility within themselves. He may not have a degree, but he has something far more valuable: the belief that anything is possible when you're willing to act on it. Practice for today. Think about the one thing you've been doubting yourself about. The dream you've put on hold because you don't feel ready. Take one small step toward it today. Make that phone call, write that email, or take that first small action. Belief is only as powerful as the action you pair with it. Chapter 11. The Courage to Begin Again. Ava stood at the edge of the Rockies, her breath coming in sharp bursts as the cold wind swept through her hair. The snow-covered peaks glowed faintly under the early morning sun, casting long shadows over the wide, empty valley below. This was her moment of peace. No kids running through the house, no phone calls to answer, no ex-husband's name on her lips, just her. For the first time in years. 3 months ago, Ava walked out of her marriage. A 10-year union, once full of promise, had slowly turned into a daily weight. A life she'd built around someone else's needs and dreams. She had given everything she had to the relationship, to the point where she forgot who she was without it. When the divorce papers were signed, something shifted deep inside her. The world didn't collapse. Instead, she felt a faint stirring, like a seed in the cold earth, wondering if it would ever push through. She felt both terrified and liberated. The life she'd known was over, and for the first time, the future was wide open. Ava's story wasn't one of dramatic escape or sudden enlightenment. It was the quiet, sometimes excruciating process of learning to breathe again, learning to be again. The first few weeks after the divorce were the hardest. Her phone stayed silent, her house too quiet. She started filling the space with distractions. Organizing closets, binge-watching shows, drinking too much wine. It wasn't until she met a neighbor, an older woman who had built her own life after a late-life divorce, that Ava began to realize what she'd forgotten. Her life had always been hers to shape. One evening, after a long conversation with her neighbor, Ava sat by her window and stared at the distant mountains, remembering a part of herself she hadn't thought about in years. What did I want before I was someone's wife? She took a deep breath and pulled out a journal, something she hadn't used since college. There, on the first page, she wrote, "I am not defined by what I've lost. I am defined by what I choose to become." Reality bends when belief begins. The moment Ava truly believed she could rebuild, her mindset began to shift. She stopped seeing herself as a woman who had failed in marriage and started seeing herself as a woman with the courage to start fresh. That belief, simple but radical, was the first crack in the foundation of her old life. And in its place, a new one began to take shape. She joined a yoga class. She picked up painting again, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. She explored her own goals without guilt, without needing anyone's approval. The more she stepped into her own desires, the more she realized how much of herself she had buried for the sake of others. Practice for today. Ask yourself, what part of me have I been hiding for fear of judgment or failure? Take 10 minutes tonight to write it down. Imagine if you could step fully into that part of yourself without apology. What would your life look like if you believed in the possibility of starting fresh? Chapter 12. Letting Go to Grow. Ben stood in the empty gym, the smell of sweat and old rubber lingering in the air. His eyes traced the familiar marks on the basketball court where he once soared through the air, unstoppable, confident, and certain of his future. A few months ago, the dream he had worked for his entire life, his career as a professional athlete, ended abruptly. His knee, once a source of strength, had given out for good. The diagnosis was clear. No more games. No more glory. Ben didn't know who he was without basketball. The game had defined him for years. Without it, he felt like a ship lost at sea. No anchor, no direction. The first few weeks after his retirement were filled with frustration and denial. He worked out endlessly, trying to push through the pain, convinced he could find a way back. But as time passed, reality set in. The game was over. In the quiet of his home, Ben began to realize that his greatest challenge wasn't the physical injury. It was the mental struggle of letting go. His identity had been built around a single dream, and now it was gone. One afternoon, while walking along a Florida beach, Ben sat down and thought about all the years he'd spent pushing, striving, forcing his body to meet an impossible standard. He realized that in his pursuit of success, he had never learned how to surrender. Reality bends when belief begins. For the first time in months, Ben asked himself, what if letting go wasn't failure? What if surrendering to this new chapter could lead me somewhere greater? He didn't have all the answers, but he allowed himself to stop fighting the loss. And that's when the vision started to shift. He began to see new possibilities: coaching, mentoring young athletes, even public speaking. The more he let go of the identity he clung to, the more room he made for something even bigger to take shape. Practice for today. Ask yourself, what am I holding on to that's no longer serving me? Let go of one thing today, whether it's an old belief, a fear, or a physical object. Create space for something new to enter. Chapter 13. The Company You Keep. Maya had always believed in the power of solitude. For months, she had been finding herself on the quiet stretches of the Oregon coast, writing, reflecting, rethinking everything. She thought she was healing, growing stronger, more connected to her vision. But then, one evening she got a call. It was Chris, the man she met on that stormy beach 2 years ago. He was in Tennessee now, helping a local community rebuild after a devastating tornado. Maya had always admired Chris's relentless spirit, but hearing his voice again felt like a reminder of something she had forgotten: how much power lies in the company we keep. Chris hadn't expected a call from Maya. After all, they had only crossed paths briefly back in Oregon. But when he reached out, it was as if everything clicked. Over the phone, they talked for hours, about their journeys, their struggles, their revelations. They laughed about the messiness of life, and how it sometimes takes losing everything to discover what really matters. Maya realized something that night. She had been isolating herself, thinking that finding her vision meant being alone. But now Chris was telling her how his community had lifted him, showing him that personal growth is sharpest when it's reflected in others. Reality bends when belief begins. Maya and Chris agreed to meet in person, and when they did, it wasn't just a reunion of old friends. It was a powerful reminder of how community shapes us. In Chris's small town, the people rallied around one another. They didn't just build houses, they built each other up. Maya realized that her vision too would only become clearer and stronger if she allowed herself to be part of a community that nurtured growth. Practice for today. Think about the people you spend the most time with. Do they lift you up or drain you? This week, reach out to someone who inspires you or challenges you in a positive way. Let their energy remind you of your own. Chapter 14. Breaking the Pattern. Sophia sat in the kitchen of her childhood home, the smell of old wood and garlic filling the air. Her mother was at the stove, humming softly. It was a familiar scene, but today, something felt different. Sophia's eyes drifted to the photo on the wall. Her grandmother, mother, and now her, all caught in the same tired cycle. For generations, fear and scarcity had ruled their lives. Her grandmother had scraped by. Her mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, and now Sophia was doing the same. It was a pattern she couldn't ignore anymore. She realized that her family had always lived with the belief that there wasn't enough. Enough money, enough love, enough opportunity. And it had shaped everything they did. But today Sophia felt a shift. She remembered the moment it clicked. After a late-night conversation with her best friend, Sophia realized something. This doesn't have to be my story. She didn't have to stay stuck in the same patterns that had defined her family for decades. It was terrifying to think of breaking away. It meant stepping into the unknown. But as she sat there in the kitchen, she made a choice. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her future. She would be the first to break the cycle. Reality bends when belief begins. The belief that she could step into abundance, not scarcity, began to take root. Sophia started small, saying no to overtime at work and yes to time for herself. She invested in a course that had always felt out of reach, and slowly, the door to a different life began to open. The more she let go of fear, the more she saw how many opportunities had been waiting for her all along. Practice for today. Identify one limiting belief that has shaped your family's story. Write it down, then ask yourself, what would happen if I let go of this fear? Chapter 15. What You're Made For. Jaden sat on the roof of his apartment in Seattle, the city skyline stretching out before him. The sound of traffic below was distant, almost muffled, as if his whole world had softened into a gentle hum. It had been a month since he left Silicon Valley behind, a world he'd once loved and thrived in. In his 20s, Jaden had been a rising star. He'd built a tech startup from the ground up, and the offers, the money, and the recognition came fast. He was living the dream. But over time he began to feel like something essential was slipping through his fingers. He had money, yes. He had a name. He had success. But every day felt like an endless race, chasing the next big thing. The human connection he once cherished had been replaced by cold algorithms and bottom lines. His purpose, once clear, had become clouded. It wasn't until a late-night conversation with a friend who worked with local artisans in the Pacific Northwest that Jaden's perspective shifted. The friend talked about craftsmanship, about slow, deliberate work, about the value of creating something that truly connected with people. Jaden realized something that hit him hard. What if I'm not made for this world of constant rush? What if I'm made for something that lasts? That thought haunted him for weeks. He began questioning everything: the startup grind, the hustle, the idea that success was about more and faster. And finally he made a decision. He sold his company, he moved to Washington, and he began a new venture. Not a tech empire, but something entirely different. A nonprofit that helped create sustainable, community-driven tech solutions that put people over profits. Reality bends when belief begins, When Jaden chose to step away from the rat race, he began to build a life with meaning. The shift wasn't easy, but as he worked on his new project, he found something he hadn't felt in years: fulfillment. He wasn't just solving problems for the sake of growth. He was solving them to make the world a better place. Practice for today. Ask yourself, what part of my life feels out of alignment with my values? Write down one step you can take to realign it, even if it's small. Chapter 16. The Power of Enough. Grace sat in her small, cozy Vermont cabin, sipping coffee on the front porch as the early morning fog lifted over the green hills. The quiet of the countryside was a stark contrast to the life she'd left behind. Just a year ago, Grace had been living in a sprawling house surrounded by things that were supposed to bring comfort but only added weight. Her life had been a constant rush, filling the space with more clothes, more gadgets, more to do. But none of it had ever been enough. The tipping point came when she stood in her oversized kitchen one evening, surrounded by piles of laundry and unopened mail. For the first time, she realized that the busyness wasn't bringing joy. It was just a distraction. She had been trying to keep up with an idea of success that wasn't hers. She started to downsize. First it was the clothes she never wore, then the furniture. Soon the excess in her life began to feel like the weight of a life she never truly chose. As Grace cleared out the clutter, she felt a surprising freedom. The space she had created wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. She started saying no to things that drained her and yes to moments of peace. It wasn't about getting rid of, but about making room for something deeper: simplicity. Grace realized that she had been looking for happiness in things, in constant doing. But true peace came when she allowed herself to feel enough, exactly as she was, with exactly what she had. Reality bends when belief begins. When Grace believed that enough was already here, in the quiet, in the space, in the simplicity, her entire perspective shifted. She stopped chasing and started living in gratitude for what was already present. The beauty of her life wasn't in what she had, but in how deeply she could appreciate it. Practice for today. Take 10 minutes tonight to look around your space. What can you simplify or release that no longer serves you? Is there something you're holding on to that's keeping you from feeling enough right now? Chapter 17. Becoming the Guide. Marcus stood at the front of the small community center, the room filled with young faces eager for guidance. His heart pounded, but not from fear. This was different. This was purpose. Growing up in Georgia, Marcus had spent years struggling with the weight of his past. A veteran of war, he'd been consumed by PTSD and the demons of his own pain. For years, he kept it all locked inside, believing he was broken, beyond repair. But then, through long therapy sessions and hours of reflection, Marcus realized something profound. His pain could help others. It wasn't a scar he had to hide. It was the bridge that could connect him to those who were also hurting. He started small, offering a listening ear to younger veterans, sharing his own struggles with the raw honesty he had once been too ashamed to express. Slowly, he began to see the shift. His words, his vulnerability, became a lifeline for others who had been too afraid to speak up. It was then that Marcus realized the pain he had carried for so long was no longer just his own. It had become the tool for healing, not just for himself, but for the people around him. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was leading. Reality bends when belief begins. Marcus didn't believe he had anything valuable to offer when he first started. But the moment he chose to see his pain as purpose, everything changed. He embraced his story, imperfections and all, and in doing so, he became the guide he never thought he could be. Practice for today. Ask yourself, what painful experience could I turn into something meaningful for others? Write down one way you can start using your story, no matter how raw, to help someone else. Chapter 18. Holding the Vision in Hard Times. Lena sat in her small Kansas apartment staring at the pile of bills on the table. The constant weight of uncertainty pressed against her chest. Her dream of opening a community center was slipping away. Her funding fell through and the neighborhood she loved was slowly unraveling. It felt like everything was falling apart. Just hours earlier, Lena had talked to Ava on the phone, a friend she'd met months ago at a retreat. Ava had been through her own season of rebuilding after her divorce. The two had bonded over their shared courage to start fresh. But now, both were facing setbacks. Ava's voice echoed in Lena's mind. Sometimes it feels like everything's stacked against you. But this is where we're tested. It's where we find out if we can hold on to the vision, even when everything tells us to quit. Ava, too, had her own challenges. Despite rebuilding her life after her divorce, she found herself questioning her choices. The road ahead seemed uncertain, and the doubts crept back in. Did she make the right decision? But as she sat on her couch looking out at the Kansas horizon, she remembered something powerful. Reality bends when belief begins. She had to believe in the future she saw, not in the chaos around her. Holding her vision wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about trusting that it would unfold even in the darkest moments. Lena and Ava both understood that the hardest part of holding a vision is the waiting. The period between the dream and its manifestation can feel endless. Yet every time they wanted to give up, they would remind each other of one truth. Your vision doesn't leave you. It stays, even when the world shakes you to your core. Practice for today. If you're in a season of setback, take a moment to pause. Close your eyes and imagine the life you're working toward. What does it look like? Feel like? Take one small step today that brings you closer to that vision, even if it's just a small action. Chapter 19. Building What Lasts. Noah stood on the worn basketball court in downtown St. Louis, the sound of bouncing balls and shouting kids filling the air. It wasn't much, just a cracked asphalt court surrounded by rusting fences. But for these kids, it was everything. Noah had spent his life in Silicon Valley building tech startups that grew fast and burned out even faster. But when the bubble popped, he found himself empty, his accomplishments meaningless. He wanted something real, something that would last. That's when he met Eli. Eli had grown up in the rough neighborhoods of St. Louis, where every kid had a dream, but few had the tools to make it come true. He had seen friends slip into gangs or drugs, but he had escaped. He wanted to give back to the next generation. It seemed like fate when the two crossed paths at a community event. Eli was running a small after-school program, while Noah had recently decided to step away from the tech world and find purpose in something lasting. Over coffee, they shared stories. Eli talked about the kids he mentored. Noah talked about the startups he built. Both men realized something fundamental. They wanted to build something that wouldn't burn out, something that would endure long after they were gone. They decided to join forces. Noah used his business acumen to secure funding, while Eli used his street smarts and community ties to create the programs. Together, they started a youth mentorship program, focusing on giving kids not just skills, but hope. They didn't just want to teach them how to survive. They wanted to show them how to thrive. Reality bends when belief begins. Their first year was filled with struggle. Long hours, little funding, and constant doubt. But the vision was clear. Every time a kid came back after a tough day to shoot hoops or talk about their dreams, they knew they were on the right path. They built more than just a program. They built a legacy. Practice for today. Think about a project or cause that could outlast you. What's one step you can take today to begin building that lasting impact? Chapter 20. Coming Home to Yourself. The retreat center in Northern California was nestled between towering redwoods, the scent of pine and earth heavy in the air. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting a soft glow on the peaceful surroundings. Ava stood by the edge of the fire pit, watching the flames dance as her breath slowed. She had spent the last 2 years rebuilding her life, and now, surrounded by others who had done the same, she finally understood. This was home. Chris, who had once struggled with addiction, sat next to her. His hands, weathered from years of hard work, rested in his lap, his eyes softened by the years of growth. Just a few years ago, he was barely scraping by, consumed by his past. But here, today, he stood grounded in the man he had become. Maya, once lost in the corporate grind, joined them by the fire. Her eyes sparkled with a new kind of energy, one born from stepping off the path that others had chosen for her. Now, she was creating something of her own, something authentic and true to her. And Marcus, who had spent years trapped in the pain of war, now found peace in the stories he shared with others. He had learned that the healing didn't come from escaping the past, but from using it to help others walk their own paths. They were all here, not by accident, but by a belief that something more was possible. That belief had shifted their realities. Reality bends when belief begins. At the retreat, they had come to realize this truth. It wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was the heartbeat of their lives now. It was why they had moved forward, even when the world told them to settle, to stop dreaming. As they sat around the fire, their stories intertwined like threads in a tapestry. Ava's courage to rebuild, Chris's rise from addiction, Maya's search for purpose, and Marcus's healing. Each path had led them here, to this moment, where they all understood. The vision within wasn't something to chase or find. It was something to remember. It had always been inside them. Practice for today. Take a moment. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, what belief will shift my reality today? Write down one small action step that you can take tomorrow to start living that belief. Conclusion. As the pages of this book come to an end, let's pause for a moment. This journey was never about finding some far-off, perfect version of yourself. It was always about coming home. Every story you've read here, every twist of fate, every triumph and struggle has one thing in common: the vision within. It was never lost. It was waiting for you to remember it. Whether you're at the start of your own journey or you've already begun to rebuild, know this: you are enough. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. The moment you start believing that, everything shifts. You're not alone. Every person who has ever taken a step toward their vision has felt the fear, the doubt, the weight of what others might think. But they kept going, because like you, they knew deep down that they were meant for more. Reality bends when belief begins. What would happen if you let yourself believe in your vision fully? What could you create? Who could you become if you stopped waiting for the perfect time and started living in the belief that your life is exactly what you're meant to make it? Remember, it's not the grand gestures that change your life, and it's the small, consistent steps that take you closer to the person you're meant to be. So go ahead, take that step. Dream, create, believe. You don't have to have it all figured out, but you do have to start. The vision has always been within you. It's time to bring it to life.